We are going to begin chapter 5 this morning. And the first 4 verses of chapter 5 is dealing with the office of the priesthood. And that in verse 1, he must possess the nature of the one he officiates for. We're told, for every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. When it says that he is taken from men, hopefully you remember that word. What's it mean?
Out from within.
Out from within. Okay. That's the word he uses here. For every high priest is taken from, out from within, man, or men. And he is setting forth in that a priest must partake of the nature for those whom he officiates. And this was also stressed back in chapter 2, verses 9 through 18. We saw that a little bit. Well, he's stating it again here. He has to partake of that nature. He is ordained for men. The word ordained literally means to stand down. And it is applied to the aspect of causing one to stand, or to place in an office, or to appoint. So he is appointed, he's made to stand for man. Here it is a Greek word that means on behalf of man. He is made to stand on behalf of men, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. Now, what would be the difference between these? I want to take a guess.
Difference between what?
Gifts and sacrifices. That he may offer both. So you're dealing with two different things. Gifts and sacrifices for sins.
Well, let's see. Would sacrifices be the ones that are required, and gifts are more like a free will offering?
I'm not sure that it would apply to that. Anybody else?
Gift. I'm not sure.
Primarily, gifts would be bloodless sacrifices. Sacrifices would be blood sacrifices. Both were commanded by God from a bloodless standpoint and a blood sacrifices. So he would be offering both of these on behalf of man. Who can have, verse 2, compassion on the ignorant and on them which are out of the way, for that he himself also is compassed with infirmity. Back in chapter 4 and verse 15, this one I wanted that word still on here. We had this word, sympatheo. Patheo having reference to passion, feelings, and then the sum, that prefix meaning with. So passions with, or feelings with. You might get the idea who can have compassion on the ignorant would be the same word. It's not. The root word, this idea of patheo, is the same, but you have a different prefix. Yeah. Materio, patheo. So you have the same root word patheo here, which is passion or feeling, but a totally different prefix. And here it's dealing with a moderation of one's feelings. So this is the idea of moderation, feelings with moderation. Now, does that make any sense right now? Probably not.
Would it be that he's concerned about them, but he's also understands their lack of knowledge? Or is concerned about their lack of knowledge?
Not so much concerned with their lack of knowledge. I'll get to that aspect in a minute. This is an idea really of not someone who is totally indifferent, but he doesn't have excessive feelings either. Neither severe nor lenient. It's the ability to balance between two extremes. Go back to Leviticus, the 10th chapter. And I'm just going to, since we're not going to get anywhere close to being through with Hebrews anyway, I'm going to take a little bit of time. I started not to. Hebrews 10. Lord spake to Aaron, do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy son. Leviticus 10.
What's that Hebrews 10? Okay.
Leviticus 10, starting in verse 8. Do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, and that ye may put a difference between holy and unholy, and between clean or unclean and clean, that ye may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord hath spoken unto them by the hand of Moses. You can know the difference between and put a difference between holy and unholy, clean, unclean, a moderated feeling. Now then, turn over to Numbers. And you'll, chapter 15. I'm not going to read all of this for time's sake. And you'd see verses 22 through 31. And you could also turn over to Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 13. And here it's dealing with, yes, sacrifices, but how they treat different individuals. That a priest had to understand and would be called upon to determine the difference between sins of ignorance and sins of rebellion. And the way in which they dealt with those sins would be different. So he had to be able to understand the difference between these two. What is it? That's what he's getting to here. He can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way. He can understand the difference between, and put a difference between, those who are just simply ignorant and those that are out of the way. Now then, let me make a comparison to today. And won't be able to really go into a study of this, but elders today, do they have to deal with individuals differently? Do they, let me just deal with withdrawing a fellowship in relationship to some individuals. Are they to withdraw fellowship from some individuals rather quickly? And then some, you see them just some would say dragging their feet.
Yes.
What's the difference?
Knowledge and whether they're flaunting their sin in public and
it's the individual that they're dealing with, right? They have to make a determination as to how to deal with that individual they're dealing with. Some of them are, yes, just weak and frail. They're trying their best to do what's right. And so you're patient with them and long-suffering. And sometimes people think too much so. Whereas someone else over here who's more rebellious doesn't care. I don't care what you say. I don't care. You're not going to be patient and long-suffering with that individual. The actions will come rather quickly with that individual. Well, what's the elder have to do? He has to be this. That's the idea. That's the idea that Paul is setting forth the priests. They had to have that understanding, not to be too lenient, yet not to be too severe. It had to be a moderated feeling.
So the same thing that applied to priests back in the old days applies to elders today, in essence.
Sure. Same thing with judges today. You'll see some judges that some think are too severe, some that are too lenient. And a lot of times it's very simply based upon the dealings that of that individual that they're dealing with. They have to have that moderated feeling because of the individual.
It's interesting here that the priest was considered holy if he didn't drink, and Catholic priests today think there's nothing wrong with it, and even preachers in denominationalism don't see any problem with it. So.
True.
We're all priests, and we're not supposed to be drinking either. So
there's the point that I was going to get to that you got to already. Every Christian has a priest, so what? Every Christian should not drink, period. And yet we have a lot of those who claim to be Christians who will defend drinking to the hilt.
I was at a wedding last night. There was members of the Church of Christ was there, and they had beers in their hands. So, I mean, that makes you feel like, you know, what's going on here?
Where they have the beer at, in public?
Yeah.
Really?
It was a wedding, Dale.
Oh,
And in trying to teach one person, used Ephesians 5:18. Be not drunk with wine. It is an inceptive verb. And you want to know what that means?
Inception means beginning.
That's it. In other words, yet you do not even begin the process of being drunk with wine. Now, how would you begin the process?
just what they call casual drinking.
First drink. First drink begins the process.
You mean be not drunk with wine is an inceptive verb?
Is an inceptive verb.
I ain't never heard the adjective inceptive. Until you
Well, that's what it is, and they then ridiculed the idea of using things like that because they wanted to drink. But that's another story. But yeah, it is a good principle in relationship to priests are not to drink.
I mean, anybody that can't see that made them holy or unholy whether they drink or not, and the priests today think, well, it's all right, you know.
And
then
it getting me off on that subject a little bit, but the first thing that alcohol dulls is what? The inhibitions. The ability to think properly.
And they were dancing, and I said, the older people get, the more ridiculous they look up there with beer in their hand trying to dance.
True. Okay, going back now to, that's a priest. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and them that are out of the way. For he himself also is compassed about with infirmity. The word encompassed, it's an interesting word. It means to lie around, literally. And thus it is the idea that you're completely or totally encircled. What is it? He was totally encircled with infirmity. Word infirmity literally is weakness or sickness. And here would be dealing with moral weaknesses, moral sickness. He is totally encompassed or encircled with moral weakness.
It says on Proverbs 8:27, he put a compass on the face of the deep.
Yeah, that's a different subject though, Dale. So he is totally encircled with this type of a situation. So, verse 3, and by reason hereof he ought, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer for sins. The word ought is a word, it's used also, and you can see it in Hebrews 2 and verse 17, and Hebrews 5 and verse 12. But it carries the idea of something that is owed, an indebtedness that one has. And thus, it is an obligation that is imposed by either law or duty. Is really the idea, but it carries with it that idea of indebtedness. There's an indebtedness there. He ought, as for the people, so for himself, to offer for sins. On the Day of Atonement, on that great day, the priest would go in to the most holy place how many times?
Once.
Well, I see.
Once.
Once?
Once.
We have once, twice. Do you realize some people argue at least 4 times?
He goes
Based
in and
on
makes
what?
an offering for himself, and then he goes to the most holy place for the people, doesn't he?
There would be at least 2 times.
But on the same day,
Two. Yes, only one day.
I mean, he can't go back out, go back in again?
Yes, at least 2 times he would enter into the most holy place, possibly up to as many as 4 times. Juan?
Yeah, right.
What was
This is actually getting into, I think it's chapter 7, but he would enter in first time for himself, second time for the sins of the people. Now then, those who would argue for 4 times, some would say just 3 times, by the way. So at least 2, as many as 4. Those who would argue for 3 times would say that he would first go in to take the smoke from the golden altar. Or some would say he actually moves the golden altar into the most holy place. So he would go in, he would do that, he would then go out, offer sacrifice, and bring the blood in for himself, leave. Those who would say 4 times, he would then return with the smoke of the incense again, go out, and then offer an animal, go back in with the blood of that animal. So there's your 4 times. Those who argue for 3 just eliminate that second time for the smoke of the altar. But that's a whole nother lesson. But that's chapter. I think chapter 7. But here,
What would it do? A fire pan with smoke from the altar and walk in there with a fire pan smoking?
yeah, basically.
Oh, okay.
Or else, depending on one's understanding of the 8th chapter of Hebrews, as to whether or not the brazen or the golden altar was a movable altar, and some would say they simply slid it under the curtain so that the smoke of that altar would fill the room. But the whole point here is he went in at least 2 different times. The first time for his own sins. The second time he went in for the sins of the people. And so,
represents the prayers of the people in Revelation 8, 3 talks about incense. Prayers of the people? Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So here he ought for the people, so also for himself. And so there you see both aspects of it, to offer for sins. Verse 4, and no man taketh this honor unto himself, but he that is called of God, as was Aaron. And this is the aspect of being appointed by God. He is appointed by God. You see a distinction here, and we won't go into the study of it, but Numbers, the 16th chapter. You have Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. They tried to take this honor for themselves. What happened to them?
Swallowed up.
Okay, they were swallowed up and destroyed them. What is it? No man takes this honor unto himself. They tried, they died. But he that is called of God, as was Aaron. Verses 5 through 10, then, Christ's qualifications for priesthood. In verses 5 and verse 6, he was appointed by God to an eternal priesthood. So also Christ glorified not himself to be made a high priest, but he that saith unto him, Thou art my son, today have I begotten thee. God glorified Christ. John 17 and verse 4 in Christ's high priestly prayer. What did he pray for there in verse 4?
I've glorified thee on the earth and done the things that you told me to do. That's not exactly the works that you told me to do or something like that.
I glorified thee, therefore, what? 17:4, John 17. I glorified thee, glorify thou me. How is he going to glorify him? By raising him from the dead.
Verse 5.
Is it verse 5?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to change my notes later on.
Well, it's 4 and 5.
Yeah, okay. Here he ties it into the aspect of sonship. But he that saith unto him, Thou art my son, today have I begotten thee. So that goes back to the second Psalm and what we studied in Hebrews 1 and verse 5 and following. That he had been given a name. What was that name? It was the name Son. Now then, he's glorified him to be made a high priest. How? Thou art my son. So this becomes the purpose of showing God, or this is for the purpose of showing God honoring his son. I've called you son. I've given you that name. Why? So you can be high priest. That's the reason for that, calling him son. And thou shalt be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So, and that's in verse 6. We are then linking together the honoring of sonship to the high priest. That these are the same. They're linked together. He becomes son. What is he? He's a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. They're tied together. He has glorified Christ. Make him son, also to make him high priest. The word forever in verse 6, that thou art priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, is a phrase really which means into the age, or for the age. Now then, we don't really have time to delve into it, but a study of 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 24 in particular would show what we're dealing with into the age, or for the age. Then cometh the end, when he shall deliver up the kingdom to God, even the Father. There's coming a time in which he's going to deliver up that kingdom. What is it? there's no longer going to be that sonship, no longer that time in which he's going to be a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. There's no need for it. Why? Because he's going to deliver the kingdom to the Father. And when you look at verse 27 there, verse 28 in 1 Corinthians 15, when all things shall be subdued unto him, then shall the Son also be subject unto him that put all things under him, that God may be all in all. There won't be that father-son distinction any longer. And the aspect of a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek was something prophesied by David in the 110th Psalm in verse 4. Now then, remember previously we had stated that Paul, one of his traits is that he anticipates what he's going to discuss later on. He does that here. He's going to be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. When does he study Melchizedek? It's going to be over in chapter 7, isn't it? So he anticipates it here, and then we'll study it in chapter 7. Verse 5 then. Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong cryings and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. The word offered here is a Greek word in the Septuagint. Now what's Septuagint?
That's the Greek translation from Hebrew.
That was made in around 270 BC by about 70 or 72 scholars. And thus many times it's, the word Septuagint means 70. So many times abbreviated as LXX. So in the Septuagint, this same Greek word is used of priest bringing a sacrifice to the altars of God. And so again, we remember that the high priest not only offered for himself up a blood sacrifice, but offered also here, he's saying forth, he offered up prayers and supplications. The word prayers is a word which means askings or petitions. With the idea, though, is that there is a specific, definite request being made. And so that's the idea of this word prayers. A specific, definite request. Supplications is a word which simply means pleadings. And so, during these days of his flesh, that's talking about Christ now, or Jesus, during the days of his flesh, when he had offered up specific prayers and pleadings unto him that was able to save him from death, and we'll come back to that in a minute, and was heard. Word heard here is a Greek word which means to give heed to obey, to hear with the meaning of to hear favorably or to grant. And so what we're seeing here is that here's Jesus in the days of his flesh. He was offering up specific prayers or pleading, specific petitions along with pleadings unto him that was able to save him from death, and God heard his prayers. He answered it favorably.
You know, if you were not a Christian, someone would ask, why did Christ have to offer up prayers to God?
Because of that close association that they had always enjoyed. And it's something that we as humans need to have. Indeed. It's the way in which I would answer it.
Still acting as an example to us.
It not only as an example, but then that close association that he had always felt and had with the Father. He was heard in that he feared. Generally, when we've come to this word feared, what is the word? Anyone remember?
Not phobos, is it?
That's generally the word. Yes.
What?
Phobos or phobia. That's generally the idea or the word that's translated fear. That's not the word here, obviously. It is instead the word eulobeia, and it means reverence or devotedness, a reverent submission or a piety. It's used only here in Hebrews 12:28, that we may serve God reverently or with reverence and godly fear.
Old New Testament, you mean?
I believe so.
Really? How about the Old Testament? You got me?
I don't have that.
I'd say, okay.
When you're looking at this word, you can go back to the life of Jesus and John 4:34, for example. My meat is to do the will of him that sent me, to finish his work. Or my meat is to do the will, yeah. Chapter 5 and verse 19. The Son can of himself do nothing but whatsoever he seeth the Father do, for what things soever he doeth, these also doeth the Son likewise. Verse 30 would be another illustration. I can of mine own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father which sent me. And you can go on several other passages in John. Jesus was always doing the will of the Father, right? That's why it says here, God heard his prayer. Heard, he favorably granted his request. Now then, the question, and this obviously applies to the prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane, as recorded in Matthew 26:39. Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Question is, what did Jesus pray on that occasion? Well, here it says, he prayed unto him that was able to save him from death. Have the two words, from, and apo, ek and apo. Remember the basic meanings of each one of them?
Out from within on the left one.
On the ek, out from within. What about apo? Anybody remember? So many times Greek prepositions are used, you use a circle. Ek, out from within. You're within something, you're coming out of it. Apo, on the other hand, is from the edge of it, going out from the edge of it. There's your distinction between the two. Here, Paul uses the phrase, he prayed these supplications and prayers unto him that was able to save him, and he uses this word ek, out from within death, not from the edge of death. He prays unto him that was able to save him out from within death. We've got about 9 minutes, according to my clock there, so I'm going to probably take the rest of the time talking about this. What did Jesus pray for? Generally, what we hear is that when here he is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the human nature not wanting to go through the crucifixion and the pain and suffering of death, he prays unto God, basically, if there's some other way, find this other way.
How would he do that?
Well, he would. Let's look at a few passages of Scripture.
Tempted in every way would.
Matthew, turn up back to Matthew, the 16th chapter. Starting in verse 21. And this will have to be quick because I could spend an hour just dealing with this one subject. That time began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he turned and said unto him, Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savourest not the things that be of God, but those that be of man. If Jesus prayed not to die the death of the cross, how would that be any different than what Peter was saying? This shall not be unto thee. And if Peter was an offense unto him, and savourest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of men, and called him even Satan in that regard, how could that same rebuke not apply to Jesus if he's praying not to die the death of the cross?
But he prayed if.
I'll get to that in a minute.
And God's the God of the impossible, so if there's another way.
There wasn't any way.
He wasn't saying I'm not going to, he's saying if there's another way.
But he was
We'll get
God,
to it.
and he knew from the beginning that he came here to die.
And, well, that's what we're getting
Also
to.
can.
Matthew, the 20th chapter, verses 17 through verse 19. He began showing his apostles here. Behold, we go, took the 12 apostles apart in the way and said unto them, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify him, and the third day he shall be raised again. He's showing every aspect of his death. And he's teaching his apostles, we're going there. We're going to go up to Jerusalem for this purpose. Turn over to Luke 9 and verse 51. Came to pass, when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. In other words, I'm not going to allow anything to deter me from going to Jerusalem. For what purpose? To suffer and to die and to be raised. That's the very purpose I'm going to Jerusalem. No one's going to stop me from doing that. Turn over to John the 12th chapter and verse 27. Now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this cause came I into this hour. He's saying specifically, I will not pray to God to deliver me from death itself, or from the edge of death, as we would see here. I will not pray that. I will not pray that unto the Father. Because that's the very reason that I've come to this earth. For that purpose. And yet, we are supposedly, in just a matter of a few hours from this time, turning around and saying, oh, but Jesus did. Let me finish, because we're not going to have time. Matthew 26, verse 50 through 56. This is when Judas comes, and I'm going to skip over some of it. Peter pulls out his sword, cuts off Malchus's ear, and Jesus tells him, put away thy sword in its place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou not that I cannot pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how shall the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be? And then He asked the multitude, "Are you come out as against the thief with swords and staves to take me? I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. If I wanted to be delivered, I could be. I'd pray the Father, send 12 legions of angels, and they would deliver me. I'm not going to do that. And yet, supposedly, right before that, he was praying for that. John 18, in verse 11, basically, you have the same idea, Jesus telling Peter, "Put up the sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?" Well, if he was praying not to be delivered into the hands of those people and not to die the death of the cross, then they could ask him, "Shall you not drink it?" Same rebuke would come on him, wouldn't it? And if not, why not? But again, go back to that aspect. God or Jesus' prayer was heard. What? Well, did he die the death of the cross? Then if he died the death of the cross, then his prayer wasn't heard. Not in the sense of what Paul uses here. What did he pray for then? Come out from within death. Here's death in this case. He prayed unto him that was able to save him out from within death. He was in something, he prayed to come out of it. What was it? He was praying for the resurrection. Now, you go back to that in relationship to what we just said in relationship to the sonship. Glorify thou me. How was he going to be glorified? The resurrection. What was he praying for? Glorify thou me. John 17:5, 4 and 5. "Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." What is it? Let me come out from death. I know I'm going to die. Let me come out from it. Let it pass. So the cup is death, yes, but let it pass. In what sense? That I'm raised from the dead. And that ties in harmoniously then with what Paul says here in Hebrews 5. And the aspect that that prayer was heard. Why was it? It was answered favorably. Did he die the death of the cross? Yes. Was he raised from the dead? Yes. That prayer was heard. God answered it favorably. They'd be raised from the dead. So he did not pray not to die or be saved from a physical death. He prayed for the resurrection from the dead. Let me come out from within death, and thus be glorified. And by that he was proven to be what? He was proven to be Son. Look at Romans 1 and verse 8, or Romans 1 and verse 4, that he was declared to be the Son of God. How? By the resurrection from the dead.
So he didn't want to be resurrected?
No, he did want to be resurrected.
Then why did he say, "But not my will, but thine"?
It was because he would not be raised if he had sinned. If he had not lived a sinless life, he would not be raised. Now, did he live a sinless life? Yes.
What was his will that he was talking about there?
Let me be raised from the dead.
Not my will.
Well, everything is based upon the Father's will.
Not my will, but thine.
Yeah. His will, though, was the same as the Father's will. But he recognized my need is to do the will of him that sent me. Same thing. Not my will, but thy will. And that's what we started with from John 4th chapter 34, John 5:19, John 5:30, John 6 and verse, although I didn't mention this one, John 6 and verse 38, and other passages. My meat is to do the will of him that sent me. My will, not my will, but the Father's will. That was his life. Why wouldn't it be his life here? Not my will, but thy will be done. It would be the same thing.
And he was sweating his blood because he was looking at the resurrection?
He wanted to be raised from the dead. And that desire to be raised from the dead.
So when he said, let this cup pass, and 26, basically that's what he was thinking.
Yes. That was his prayer, according to what Paul says here. And that God answered his prayer in a favorable way. He granted the request. Okay, since the bell's already rung, we've got to stop.